So welcome, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce the speaker for this session, Dr. Jenny Johnstone, who will be speaking to us on the topic of the role of nutrition, diet, and supplements for ADHD. Dr. Johnstone is an associate professor at Oregon Health and Sciences University in Portland, Oregon. As a licensed clinical psychologist, she is director of the center called SNAC Lab, which stands for the Science of Nutrition, Affect, and Cognition in Kids, which focuses on complementary and integrative interventions, including multi-nutrient supplementation and mindfulness for mental health concerns, including ADHD, emotion dysregulation, mood, anxiety, and stress. The lab's cross-disciplinary collaborative team includes psychologists, nutritionists, naturopaths, psychiatrists, microbiologists, and epidemiologists, conducting quantitative and qualitative research. Current projects examine the biomarkers of multi-nutrient supplementation and response, including examination of stool microbiome and metabolites, neurotransmitter concentrations in urine and plasma, stress-related hormones and inflammatory markers, and genetic factors, as well as looking at toxicant levels, such as urinary glyphosate and lead. The lab is also conducting NIH-funded clinical trials in racially and ethnically diverse populations with a focus on Black and Hispanic families. And they will be studying multi-nutrient formulations in tandem with behavioral interventions in years to come. So with that, we're honored to have Jenny with us, and I will give this over to her, and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end.
So I've been at OHSU for about 11 years, and I do not have any disclosures. And what I mean by that is the formula manufacturer, we do study a couple of different formulas. They just provide the placebo and the active. They don't provide any funding. They don't provide any meals. And I don't have any commercial interests in any company. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the historical role of diet generally, but also specifically for ADHD, elimination diets and whole diets, why it might matter, the supplementation work that we do, and then what we found in a couple of the studies. So taking us back well before any of us were here, thousands of years, our ancestors have known that food impacts our health, particularly our mental health. And in Ayurvedic medicine, the knowledge of life principles emphasize the balance between the mind, body, and spirit, with a focus on food and the importance of eating right for your body to promote integrative health. And likewise, in Chinese medicine, there are 5 branches, and of the 5 branches, diet and lifestyle are the 2 that we have the most direct influence over. And they affect our health and wellness, and they're the things that we repeat daily for a lifetime. So it's where we can really make a difference. So I appreciate this slide. We're first going to talk about just dietary interventions for ADHD. This is a figure by Ryder et al., and they show the progression of nutritional interventions through the years. The light gray boxes reflect the things to eliminate, and the darker gray are things to include. So interest in the role of diet in sort of modern times in relation to ADHD has been around for 50 years. And the person who really got folks thinking about diet and ADHD is Dr. Ben Feingold, who is a pediatrician. And he saw that some of his patients, he was actually an allergist, a pediatric allergist, and he saw that some of his patients got a lot better when they eliminated certain foods, allergenic foods from their diet, and so put together the Feingold diet, which still has lots of adherence. Website and people that swear by that. So basically, you eliminate food coloring and salicylates from the diet and artificial flavors and colors. Then what happened in the 1980s, despite the kind of anecdotal evidence and some smaller studies that there was benefit, the studies in the 80s had showed mixed results. And so it kind of called into question this diet's effectiveness. And then at the University of Southampton in the UK, they did a study and looked at the genotypes of kids. They gave them food coloring and preservatives or not, and found that the kids that had a genetic polymorphism associated with a histamine gene were the ones that benefited from not having food dyes and preservatives, and they did better when you took it out of their diet. So it explained some of the discrepancy between the early studies and this idea of a Feingold diet working, and then, oh, we didn't find it works. So if you hear people talk about the Feingold diet, that is the history there. So when we think about diet, there's two sides. There's what you want to eat less of, and these are kind of four broad areas. Artificial flavors, additives would fall into that, gluten, sugar, and dairy. And this also makes up what is the few foods diet. And there's a considerable amount of research on eating really restrictive diets and that being helpful. But the other side of that is, particularly in families with ADHD, adhering. Often you have children with ADHD, there are parents with ADHD, or they're on the spectrum. It is a heavy burden to eliminate and do a very specific elimination diet. And it can, in some cases, be lower in nutrient values. So there's a lot of burden to doing few foods diets, but it can be helpful for some kids and for maybe a shorter amount of time. The other side of diet is what to eat more of. Vitamins, minerals, and omega-3 fatty acids are the key areas to look at. I will also say that it is difficult to do research on few foods diets because the blinding is problematic. So it's hard to know, whether it's the motivation or the elimination of some of the dietary components. So whole foods diet is the idea of looking at all the things in a group rather than specific things. And there's good evidence for the Mediterranean diet, which is rich in omega-3 fatty acids, fruits and vegetables. There's some good research out of Spain looking at the Mediterranean diet in kids with ADHD, and they found that there was 7 times more kids were likely to have an ADHD diagnosis if they were low adherence to the Mediterranean diet. And then there's our Western diet. You recognize it there. And that is associated with an increase in ADHD, about 2 times more likely to have ADHD symptoms when consuming a Western diet. And when you think about the Western diet, there's our traditional foods. So you have corn and salmon, and what that might look like in today's standard American diet, also known as the SAD diet, are things like corn chips or fish sticks. So thinking about, from a general perspective, what to talk with your patients about is, what sort of foods are you eating? And get some input or some information from them in terms of the quality and types of foods they're eating. We live in a country where and a lot of countries consume ultra processed foods at an extremely high rate. So the foods that are filled with salt, fat, and sugar. So thinking about ways to reduce that intake can be helpful. I'm going to talk a little bit about the micronutrient interventions, but sort of holding in mind this idea of diet as well as supplementation. This is a slide from Jean Arnold, who some of you may know, very esteemed octogenarian child psychiatrist. And he talks about sex versus rude. So interventions that are safe, easy, cheap, and sensible really require less evidence in terms of effectiveness to test them out than something that is potentially more risky in terms of side effects, is unrealistic. For example, maybe a few foods diet, while it could help, it could be really unrealistic for a family, difficult or expensive. So just thinking, especially for folks that are just getting started, thinking about treatments and there's so many different options, medication, keeping in mind what is something that is pretty safe, pretty easy, and potentially beneficial. And yeah, that's just a good frame of reference. So thinking about diet and nutrition, what are some of the potential mechanisms? Reducing inflammation is one. It's interesting, when Nosheen mentioned the biological work we're doing, we're looking at samples, blood, urine, stool, saliva, and hair from children that were in a study we conducted. And we're finding pretty consistent markers of reduced inflammation, reduced oxidative stress. So I guess I shouldn't be, but I'm sort of surprised that we're seeing this in different biological sample types. So that's interesting to see the practicality of this, or the strength of this. Also, cofactors for neurotransmitter metabolism. I'm going to show you that on the next slide. Alterations in the microbiome. And so this slide I've had for a while. It was very theoretical, but now we actually are in the microbiome. We're seeing that kids that took the micronutrients had an increase in butyrate producing bacteria, which are anti-inflammatory. Mitochondrial function, addressing inborn errors of metabolism, are just some of the potential mechanisms. So, for example, this is dopamine, and it's known for its positive mood states and learning. And in each of the steps, you need vitamins and minerals to produce dopamine. So the cofactors that are necessary can be in foods or maybe in supplements that are taken. And each arrow represents a metabolic process that requires a number of cofactors or micronutrients. And the brain is a very hungry organ. While it's only 20% of the body or 5% of the body, it takes up 20% of the nutrients. Something to keep in mind. So in terms of supplementation, the best evidence is for omega-3 fatty acids. There are a number of single nutrients that have shown modest or small benefits, but can be helpful, particularly if kids are low to start with. And having said that, low to start with, when I talk about the multi-nutrients, we have consistently found that the children that benefited weren't necessarily low to begin with. So it's not always true that you need to do a blood test to find out whether they might benefit. And then I'm going to share some of the research we have on broad spectrum micronutrients. So the formulas that we study have a number of ingredients, basically all essential vitamins and minerals, a couple of amino acids, and a couple of antioxidants. The research has been going on for more than 20 years, and we're beyond 40 peer-reviewed publications that run the gamut of types. So open label. We've have 3 randomized control trials, 2 in children, and I'm going to just keep going so that I can get through all of this. The most recent randomized controlled trial was in the Orange Journal, as child and adolescent psychiatrists like to call it, in 2022. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that. Um, I'll briefly talk about a boy that we saw as part of the study. He was 8 years old at the time when we met him, and he was in such difficult shape in terms of emotional functioning. They were having to clear the classroom because his behavior was very destructive. And I saw him for an assessment for ADHD, which he met criteria, but he also had this overlapping picture of emotional dysregulation. And he had been polydrug exposed in utero, and his mom was unhoused at the time. And she basically left him on the doorstep of a friend, a friend's mother. And so the mother adopted him and brought him to us. And I'm going to tell you more about him at the end. So we'll keep your curiosity going. So the study, the randomized controlled trial that we did in the US and Canada, the one that was in the Orange Journal, is we did it at OHSU, University of Lethbridge, and Ohio State. We included kids, or kids needed to meet criteria for ADHD, but we also wanted some irritability or anger, emotional dysregulation, so oppositional defiant disorder or dysregulated mood disorder. These are the pills. They taper up. They taper up to 9 capsules a day. Most kids did found benefit on 7 or 8, and this is one of the 2 formulas. There's another formula that kids do well at a lower dose. I know it sounds, maybe you're thinking, what, 9 capsules a day? It's three times a day, and it's amazing what kids can do and families can do when things are going better at home. I'll just speak briefly on the primary outcomes. One was a clinical global impression improvement, and the other was a DSM-5 based parent report, the CASI-5. We did blood work, and we also did urinalysis for safety. So we enrolled 135 kids, for which we had 126 complete data. And we had, the kids were about 75, three quarters were male, which is pretty typical for ADHD diagnoses. And 75% were, or 74 were, followed the study protocol fully. So in terms of treatment responders, just over half the group that received the multinutrients were considered treatment responders, and that was based on the CGI-I, so blinded clinician rating, taking into account all the symptoms and whether they were improved. And about 20% of the placebo group, pretty typical. They're taking pills, their parents or caregivers are saying nice things about them, they're getting paid. So there's some benefit to being in a study. I'm just going to go through this quickly. I'm very happy to send additional slides and information if folks are interested. So I mentioned that there are 3 randomized controlled trials. The first one was done in 2024 in adults in New Zealand. And the second one was done in children in New Zealand. And then the third one that I'm talking about now was done where I mentioned the US and Canada. And pretty consistent, about half the folks that receive the multinutrients do well, and placebo can be up to 30% response. For the child study, though, when you looked at per protocol, so the people that were actually doing what they were supposed to do, the difference increased a little bit. The children also grew 6 millimeters more in the 8 weeks. And if you extrapolated that into, which is 1.4 inches, sorry, let me say that in a different way. 6 millimeters more, if you went over a year, it would be 3.6 centimeters or 1.4 inches. And consider this is in contrast to stimulant medication, where kids can have appetite suppression, fall off the growth curve. And there have been studies to try to refeed them to increase their caloric intake, not looking at nutrients. And the studies did not find benefit. So as Gene Arnold said, he is also, has a farm and an orchard and very involved in producing food. He says if you feed something with nutrients, if you fertilize it, it will grow. And that's true for humans as well. We didn't have any between group differences in terms of safety, and there were no concerning blood values or anything from the urinalysis. So I want to follow up with our the boy that we are talking about. His name's Victor. There's actually a video, a YouTube video. The link might come up here. So after 8 weeks of taking the multi-nutrients, he was able to read the instructions so that he could do a Lego set on his own. The parents stopped getting calls from his school, and he got to where he needed to be. After 6 months, he was able to be at grade level. And I just want to show him now. He is 15, he's 6'2", and this is he and his mom at a wedding. She sent me the photos. She knows I'm using them. And this is him. And it's just, it's very exciting to know that he's had such a positive journey. There are a lot of other conditions. I'm going to go through this quickly so we have time for questions, but there's a lot of other conditions for which the multi-nutrients have been studied. As I say, there have been studies for the last 25 years. I lived in New Zealand when we had earthquakes, and we were in the middle of doing some micronutrient research. So we had the opportunity to study the effect of multi-nutrients on post-disaster. So colleagues that have connections in LA area, we should do some research on dealing with the fires going on there. Also, there was a mass shooting in Christchurch at the mosque. If you remember, there's a published paper on, it was open label. They had a Muslim PhD student go around to the Muslim community and offer multi-nutrients. And then they did a like community level study on folks that took the micronutrients versus not, and how they were coping with the stress and grief. And there were positive outcomes there. That's this last massacre, earthquake, and flood. Oh, so many studies. Okay. So yes, about 3 times as many kids were treatment responders based on the clinical rating. Both groups improved on the parent ratings. I could give a whole nother talk on that, but we have a paper out on the, it's amazing when you ask parent Likert scale questions versus asking them specific questions in terms of their responses. We collected biological samples. I've mentioned all that. I think I'm just going to say thank you and give you time for questions. And here's a team. There's an interdisciplinary team that work on this. So